This is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at Van Dieman's Autumn Series Pixie Parasols. I'll do a writing sample on Tomoe River paper using a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.5 stub nib. I'll also take a look at a writing sample I did earlier on 20-pound copy paper. Then I'll compare Pixie Parasols to similar inks in my collection. And finally, I'll take a look at the results of the water resistance test. The first writing sample was done with a glass nib dip pen, and the ink looks fairly uniform, but I did have to redip the nib halfway through the writing sample, which is unusual. And when I tried to do the ink swatch with my tweezers, the ink just didn't want to grab the paper. And I had similar results with Rhodia and with my ink swatch cards. I'm going to begin with my Pilot 78G with an extra fine steel nib. Just like the swatch, the ink's just not wanting to grab the paper, and it feels like, oh, I just need to dip the pen and get more ink in it. But I have been dipping and dipping this pen, and it just doesn't make a difference. Let me see. I wouldn't call it, it doesn't feel scratchy, it just feels dry. And that makes sense. Next, I've got my Sailor Progear Slim with a 14 karat fine nib. This feels smooth, but very dry at the same time. And you can see it feels dry, but it's not actually dry. You can almost see that the X almost wiped completely away. Next, I've got a Sailor 1911 Standard with a 14 karat medium nib. This is better, much better, but still feels dry. Next, I've got my Pilot Custom 74 with a 14 karat fine nib. It's starting to feel smoother, but it still feels dry, if that makes any sense. It feels like I'm writing without any ink. It's giving me that sensation that I'm about to run out of ink. I'm just going to put same. Next, I've got a Pilot Metropolitan with a cursive medium steel nib. The problem I've had with this nib on the other writing samples, and it seems like I'm having the same issue here, I'm having to press on the paper to get the ink to grab onto the paper. Kind of like the same issue I had with the swatch up here. It just doesn't want to grab the paper, and that's an unpleasant sensation. That's the reason I like using fountain pens, is I can lightly grip the pen and exert very little pressure. So ink just did not want to grab the paper. Next, I've got my Kaweco Lilliput with a double broad steel nib. Again, I'm getting that sensation that it doesn't want to grab the paper. It feels very smooth, but you see some little skips. I'm having to press onto the paper. And finally, I've got a Jinhao X750 with a 1.5 replacement nib. I got this nib from Anderson Pens. You can also get these same type of nibs from Goulet Pens. And you can see there, I was trying not to exert too much pressure, and even with me exerting more pressure, not wanting to grab the paper. And I'm having to exert so much pressure that I'm feeling the inside of the nib slit want to catch on the paper. On 20-pound copy paper, I had some of the same issues that I did on the Tomoe River. It felt dry, didn't want to grab the paper. Now, I noticed as I was writing with the Kaweco double broad, it felt pleasant enough, but then when I started writing that it felt smooth, I started having some issues with skipping, and I was having to press on the paper to get it to grab the paper. And another issue I had, it's not, well, it is feathering slightly, but even more unpleasant than the feathering is it looks grainy on the paper. In the wider nibs, the ink looks grainy. It bled through some, but it's a pale enough ink that it doesn't look too bad, but it's just unpleasant to write with. Okay, let's take a look at some similar inks. Now, as I was doing these writing samples, I started asking myself, why did I pick this ink? What about this ink, when I was looking at the swatch, made me pick a sample of this? Maybe this swatch I thought looked interesting. Maybe I thought the writing would come out some of the darker shades. I'm not sure. But there are some of these lighter colored blues that I like, and some of them that I really dislike. Sailor Manyo Haha was a little bit more, when you compare it to this ink, it's a little bit more periwinkle. It's got a little more lavender in it, and I think it was better behaved in the pens than this one. Another one that I liked quite a lot once I got over the fact that it's more blue than green was Krishna Lyrebird Green. See how uniformly it came off the tweezers in the swatch, and Haha did quite a bit better than the Van Diemen's ink. But this ink is very well behaved. I enjoy using it, but you can see when you compare the two, Pixie Parasols is a little bit brighter. This has more of a like a dirty water look to it, which I actually kind of like when I'm writing with it. Kobe West Pearl Blue looks a little more dirty than the Lyrebird Green did, but I prefer the Lyrebird Green. Ferris Wheel Press Blue Cotton Candy was just too pale of an ink. And I found when I was doing my writing samples with the Pixie Parasols, usually I love doing these writing samples. I love writing on the different types of paper. This, as I was doing the writing samples, it kept going through my mind, I can't wait till I'm done with this. Just was not very pleasant. And my water resistance test, there is nothing left on the paper. No water resistance at all. Okay, on my Tomoe River paper, it almost looks like it's on the verge of bleeding through. And it may just have been because I was having to exert pressure and maybe the fibers of the paper were getting torn by the nib, and that made it want to come through, because in the swatch and in the scribble, yeah, I don't think you would have any issues there. And there's no pen that this was pleasant to use in. Now, I don't use broader nibs. I use mostly Japanese fine and medium nibs, maybe in a broader and wetter Western nib like a Pelican or something like that. Maybe the results would be different, but this was just not that pleasant. But my results from this ink were quite a bit different from the Van Diemen's Rhubarb Crumble. These are the only two Van Diemen's inks that I've used so far, and I really enjoyed the Rhubarb Crumble. In fact, my Kaweco AL Sport, I have inked up with it right now, and you can see the swatch went down very nice and neatly, and it did well in several of the pens, and almost all of the pens. So that's just the difference between one ink and another. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.